Let's build a large city block with tall buildings, a tram line running high between them with 2 elevated stations and lots of elevated pedestrian-only connections for that vertical feel. Hello everyone, welcome back to Asturis in City Skylines. This new project will also finally totally complete the main transportation hub in the city core, as well as the tram connections going away from it. But enough with the intro, you are going to see what we are going to build anyway, so let's go build it. Alright, so let's start with placing some buildings, but we are just going to do that to get some general feel of the area, and then we need to do one very important thing, and that is to define the tram line that is going to be running high between all the buildings. So when I was starting with this, I was first thinking that I'm just going to build some kind of like a very twisty tram track that is just going to go between the skyscrapers, and I suppose that eventually it did turn out like that, although we are not really going to do like super tall skyscrapers in this area because, like I mentioned last time, I'm thinking of this place as not really the super city center. This is like the second center, or I'm not really sure how to call it, but the actual city center is that circle that that is on the other side of this flying train park that we can see there down there on the left, right? So yeah, I'm not really going to overdo it with height, but anyway, it's still going to be quite interesting because the place is really going to be very high density. So this tram line, very important. This is the connection that leaves the main transportation hub. It basically goes underneath all the platforms and everything. So it's actually going to form a connection from one end to the other end of this transportation hub. So there is that main tram station that we built in like episode 3 or 2 or something like that. And it's on the side of the transportation hub, and obviously the hub is huge. So this line just goes just below it, and just going to finally reach the sunlight again on the other side, where we are simply going to do another stop. So they are going to be fairly close to each other, but I think that it's perfectly justified because the density of this place really does require frequent stops. Then it's going to continue, and it's going to start gaining some serious elevation. Why? Well, because it needs to cross all the train tracks, and remember what I said earlier, that this line goes underneath all the platforms. So not only it needs to reach the same height as the platforms, but it then needs to go over all the train tracks that are also gaining height. So this tram line is kind of going to be a little bit steep. So that's the reason why it needs to twist inside of this block so that it has more distance to gain that elevation and have some reasonable grade so that, the trams could somewhat realistically, although the grade is kind of realistic, so they would be able to just, navigate through those tracks. It then continues more or less parallel to the train tracks towards that kind of like a brutalist looking train station that we did a couple of episodes ago, and it continues up into that like a sloped, like a hilly area with all those residential buildings. All right, so that's a very important tram line, and it's exactly the same line that then continues into that brutalist area from the hill and continues over the river, over that 3-level bridge from a couple of episodes back. All right, so that's this tram line right here. All right, so defining that geometry was kind of straightforward, I suppose, because it wasn't really all that brutal, the elevation change, so, it was okay. And then it was the matter of filling this place with buildings. Now, I really like doing this, by the way. Not really these super tall building blocks, but something a little bit lower, and playing with the elevation of buildings. So creating like a skyscraper here, and then something shorter in that same block, and maybe like a larger footprint building that's going to be like the colorful highlight of the area. So that's exactly the case with this particular block. Right now I can't really remember what that red outline building is called, but it is going to be the night highlight of this place as well, because I am going to put some like neon beams to highlight those red outlines. So they are going to be red during the day and very much red during the night as well, and only during the night, because I am going to make it with procedural objects and make it actually appear only during the night. It's going to be the same neon cube or block that I'm using to light up the buildings at that circle area, and also the high-speed train tracks, yeah, with that white color. Now, also, I would really like to continue this trend of putting grass on roofs. So we are going to do that mostly with these kinds of like inside of blocks filler buildings, because these particular office buildings are absolutely perfect for that. And just to have some more variety, I'm going to leave those, AC areas opened like that, showing the original texture of the roof, and do some just more variety. Later, we are also going to do, well, we're going to mention that later, since I'm going to do it later, because now I really need to talk about these pedestrian paths, because that's actually kind of the highlight of this project. So we have these green pedestrian connections going from various parts of the city, really. And in the last episode, the video was even called that, like a major pedestrian hub. And it was, but it was kind of the hub for the surface paths. But today, we are going to do like networks of these elevated green paths that are just going to be going over the roads. The roads are going to be on the surface, on the bottom level. Then we are going to have these green pedestrian connections, and above that, the trams just going above the blocks and being very tall above the ground. All right. So this green pedestrian connection, it's obviously only pedestrians. It's not going to see any vehicles. And it's going to go from that La Défense building that is on the beach or close to the beach area. And from that, there is going to be like this network of roads that are going to be going not really above the roads, but on the sides of them, just like in here. So I'm going to do lots of these commercial like galleries down below. I'm only going to use these because this is not really supposed to be like super detailed area anyway, and I actually kind of want to have it a little bit unified. So these are going to be the buildings forming the base for this pedestrian connection. And on the intersections, these buildings are going to be cut on the edges of the roofs to allow the connections over the street, just like I'm doing right here. This particular corner though, or this intersection, is going to be like a split. It's going to be like a three-way connection between three different directions for that pedestrian path, because one direction is going to lead to this new tram stop and the other direction is going to lead back into the downtown, into the main transportation hub. Because if you remember, for example, when we were building the flying train path, right on the side of it, there is a tram station. Again, there are tram stations everywhere in Asturis, of course, so no surprise. But there is this green path just, aiming somewhere in this general area. So I planned that so that it would be connected to what we are building today. All right. So more of these commercial buildings. In this particular corner, this intersection as a whole is supposed to be a little bit more unique. So I, for example, placed that Guggenheim Museum, I believe, or building from New York, which is not exactly all that large, but it fits perfectly in this corner. And by the way, that building was kind of the motivation to then build another of these circular buildings in the different corners of that intersection. So that was the reason for that larger building with those red outlines that I talked about, that I mentioned, and also that cinema building that I'm using a couple of times already in the city because I just really, really like it. It's looking great. And it was a nice coincidence that it perfectly fit height-wise below those tram tracks. So that was just amazing. Now, the tram tracks are not really going to go over this main road just like that. So I decided that it's actually going to be like a building itself that goes over the road, and it's not really going to be particularly large, as you can see, just a couple of floors really, to just build some sort of a structure below the tram tracks, the entire station. And as you can see with procedural objects, it's also going to provide like the railing for the platform itself. So, it's like a convenient little piece of detail that I can do there. So, not bad at all. We are going to have elevators, of course, because this place is very tall, very compact, so we couldn't really have space for stairs. And then it's going to be connected between all these different levels. So Right below the platforms, there is going to be this green path. Again, that's just the network that I was talking about. And those elevators are going to go down towards it. And also there's going to be invisible pedestrian paths to connect to the surface. Now, by the way, this pedestrian connection, the green one, is going to be connected to the surface in many different places. So you will see that, because I think that in the time-lapse I did include like a thorough showcase of me building all the pedestrian connections. Probably not all of them, because it was absolutely crazy for this one, but like an indication of the main ones and how it's all going to be. Now, this is super important though, because that was actually the main motivation for starting this project, and that was to finally do this last corner of the main transportation hub. With that, another tram station that is, the same line that we are talking about with this project. So we must also do some kind of a structure to finish this embankment for all these tracks that are going into the transportation hub. Obviously, this embankment is absolutely huge. There are lots of tracks, obviously splitting into the platforms, but there are lots of tracks even going away from the station. So that's what we've already seen. And not just train tracks, but also the tram. Now, I really wanted to somehow visually highlight these kinds of tracks, and what better way than to just use the pedestrian path, again this green one, because it's a very distinct color. You can immediately spot it, and it's just going to form this very nice edge in here, and it is actually going to be also a very convenient pedestrian connection, like a pedestrian highway basically. So if you want to, because the train tracks are already cutting all these city blocks, so why not add another network to the side? It's not really going to obstruct building the blocks or anything, and we should have some kind of separation between the tracks and the building blocks anyway, so there would be some space left. So why not just fill it with this elevated pedestrian connection? It's going to conveniently, as you can see right here, it's going to conveniently reach this second tram station on the other side of the transportation hub, and it's going to just allow people to walk through the entire city, really, because that's what the transportation hub is supposed to be. If you are going to arrive into the city, you are just going to have the freedom of either boarding the trams, buses, really, and just walk everywhere into any direction into the downtown. So that's exactly the point, and I think we managed eventually to do that, to kind of uphold that principle that I really wanted to do. So yeah, that's it. That's basically what it is. It's just a pedestrian connection. I don't think it needs any other explanation, right? And like I said, visually it's forming that outline. So now we are going to do more of this second station. So this was a little bit different because there were already some details set up from the previous projects, like for example that pedestrian path going from that central park with the flying train, and of course we have all of these buildings, not really finished, but we have those on the side of the transportation hub. So I just finished it with the good old office buildings, these brick office buildings. They are perfect for these kinds of detailing purposes, fillings of these corners and areas that are otherwise a little bit too difficult to fill with anything else. And we are just going to really fill these just open holes in this entire building, because the station is pretty much just one huge building anyway, right? We are also going to complete these platforms, because I don't really have anything better to place in there. It's just going to open up the area. It's going to create some kind of open surface below that roundabout buildings that's going over the platforms. And down here we are going to do that tram stop. It's not going to be anything super special or anything like crazy. It's really going to be just enough space for the platforms on the sides of the tracks, and then it's going to have these green surfaces reaching those other places in the network that we are setting up in this overall episode. So yeah, there's just going to be that. Obviously, I'm going to do the borders, do some kind of railings on the sides, and prepare some sort of buildings on the opposite side of that road or the street on the surface, so that we can conveniently cut through into this block and continue with the pedestrian ways somewhere else. This is just the usual detailing that I'm doing all the time. So for example, the gravel beneath those station tracks, and then just some kind of details. This particular roof, you're not going to see it anymore in the time lapse because I got rid of it. But in the end, I'm actually going to put it back because I kind of liked it, and doing some kind of different roof in this place did not really work. I really wanted to do it with glass. And yeah, I can already read the comments. I can already see the comments saying something like, well, Asturis is tropical area. They couldn't have glass. They would all melt below it. Well, have you ever seen like shaded glass? That's a thing that actually exists. And in City Skylines, there kind of is an effect like that because the way shadows work in the game, you are not really going to see light shine through glass surfaces in City Skylines. So, in a way, it is actually creating this like shaded or semi-transparent glass effect. So that's what I'm thinking, exactly what that is. All right, so it's glass. So yeah, there it is. Now there is a bit of a problem with City Skylines, and that is, well, actually it's not really a problem, but in Asturis there is this little issue that we need to match different elevations with these pedestrian connections, or this entire network of the green paths. And doing it with procedural objects, ploppable asphalts, of course, that would be a little bit too inconvenient. So I have to do it with networks. Now there is a way, and I think I've showed it on streams, and it is going to be shown in that procedural objects tutorial, or actually it was already released because I am going to release this sometimes in March probably, but after the procedural objects tutorial. And there is that matching color, right, between procedural objects and, for example, the repaint mode, or back in the day network skins. So there is that way that I showed. But back in the day I did not know it, so it was a bit of a problem, and I think I first needed to use it with that flying train park, and it was fine. There were some issues with that, but that's all solved. So I can now use networks and procedural objects together and have same colors of them. So we can finally do these different elevations of the pedestrian connections and have that green path on different levels and interconnected. So that's nice. And just use different techniques for detailing it. So we are now going to do just another block, another completely different project really in this overall project, and that is going to be finishing this other tram track that is running from the beach, kind of parallel to the flying train park, and it cuts inside of this block because unlike the previous tram line, this one runs on the surface, which means that it needs to cut into the buildings. It is not going to go over them. And we already established with that flying train park episode that this building is going to cut inside of these residential buildings. So I simply decided that I'm going to use exactly those same buildings for this second entrance into that tunnel, and use pretty much the same technique as well. So using these concrete walls to just polish the edges a little bit so that we are not going to see any of those procedural object inconsistencies in there. And it's working perfectly fine. And I would obviously make sure that inside of the tunnel it's also looking good, because there is inevitably going to be some kind of a first-person ride. So, it's just going to be much more convenient to already prepare for that. I believe that I'm not showing exactly super everything with the process of building these blocks, because it was kind of more of the same. As you can see, it was just filling these roofs with the green path and putting all these buildings below it and everything. This was a little bit more complicated because here I needed to match the elevations but with the buildings below it. But as you can see with procedural objects, it's not really that big of a deal. And by the way, now that I think about it, I did read the patch notes for the node controller, and apparently it already does have the function of increasing the lane width together with increasing just the width of the network. So for example, a pedestrian path. So I suppose that the next time I'm going to go into Asturis, I'm most probably going to start experimenting with different sizes of these pedestrian paths to really make them highly customized for those specific places. So, for example, from that last episode, people were commenting that I should have made the pedestrian paths go through that sculpture to kind of, cut some ways through it, but I could not because I did not have the narrow paths. But now I suppose I could be able to do it. So maybe I'm going to revisit that place and see what I can do there. But we will see. I'm definitely going to use it in the new projects though. So I'm already starting building, for example, another pedestrian area for the next project. So there it's going to be very, very handy if that's going to be possible. And not with this one though, but with this one it was not exactly needed because I was using the ruler, the prop ruler, and I was making sure that these green pedestrian paths are around 6 meters wide, because that is the narrowest path that I have for pedestrians. So that's eventually looking really good. And just like with the previous episode, even with this one, all of these green surfaces, this entire network is going to be heavily used by pedestrians. And I suppose the reasons for that are exactly that. It is a network and it is connecting this entire area together. So unlike the streets are actually kind of inconvenient if you think about it, because some of these roads or streets are going to be dead-end, ending inside of these blocks. And they are not really cutting through these blocks. So actually using the streets might be a little bit inconvenient now for pedestrians, but that's exactly why we have those green paths, and they are really providing very convenient connections through the entire area. So, and most importantly, connecting the public transport options. So I suppose that just like with the previous project, there are going to be pedestrians that will use some of these paths to just make a transfer to a different line somewhere else. Anyway, we are mostly done with the green surfaces, or actually we are completely done with the green surfaces in the time lapse, and now I'm just going to do some really details of these blocks. I have to admit, I was trying to do this place rather quickly, not really bothering with detailing some of these blocks, and I suppose for a good reason, because the highlight of this particular place is the volume. Yeah, it is. And some of these blocks are just going to be, somewhat similar to some previous blocks that we already did, but eventually we do need that quantity anyway. Nevertheless, some of these blocks that I'm doing over here, they are going to have that technical detailing inside of them, especially the larger blocks with like different variations of buildings. Because that's the kind of detailing that I really like. I think I first started doing it with that, that was kind of a long time ago, with that second bridge, the arch bridge. I think I did that, and it was looking rather good. So that's exactly what I was doing there, that little detailing inside of that block by the railway. So doing the asphalt surface, making it stained, using some pipelines as networks, and it's actually exactly the same detailing as down here below the platforms, right? So this kind of detailing that tells you that Asturis really is built on multiple levels, even on levels that you cannot really see fully, right? So that's what I really like to continue with. Anyway, this took hours. This took a really long time, especially because I then kind of broke these pedestrian paths accidentally, so I had to redo them. But I'm going to only show you the first try, of course. So connecting everything so that pedestrians can use it. And this is actually these days kind of easy because, I've done this a million times before. But this particular place, this corner with the elevators, and especially because these networks are overlapping, the tram tracks are overlapping with the roads down below, this is not really easy to do. So as you can see, I really need to calculate in advance how many nodes I need in this place. And then I'm just kind of placing it so that it hangs in the air. And I just need to remember what I built and where and what I intended for what. And then when I'm done with all these, preliminary just positions, I'm going to go back and with Move It, carefully position all of these paths where they need to go. So that's something that requires a little bit of experience, I suppose, because just, building that network through those elevators and then, for example, fiddling with the network multi-tool is not exactly going to work because you are going to have very short segments there. and the network multi-tool is not really working with that. So it's just best to kind of stretch it around the area and just imagine how many nodes you need and where. Oh yeah, so I guess I completely skipped in the time-lapse the process of just, that positioning, but you've probably seen that in, every other Asturis video anyway, because I am doing it in every other Asturis video anyway. So yeah, and the conversion to invisible pedestrian paths, of course, I skipped that, but that's kind of straightforward. What's very important with the conversion to the pedestrian paths, invisible ones, is that you do convert them so that they are elevated. It's super important. That's what I did not do here. I accidentally converted them into surface variants, which means that they are immediately going to snap to the surface, and that's completely going to break any kind of careful alignment that you did. So yeah, make sure that you are going to convert it into invisible elevated paths. Even the ones that are sticking to the surface, at the end of your networks. So anyway, then you could have seen me put those kinds of commercial buildings, those commercial blocks inside of these commercial galleries below the green paths, because that's just going to make the pedestrians use these paths even more, because they are going to be going to those shops, and what better way than to use the pedestrian path. So that's one way of making the city a little bit more alive. It's of course going to create more cargo traffic to these shops, which is actually something that I do want. I do want to have very strong traffic in the city so that we can later, do something about it, later fix it or something, finally provide some kind of, beefier traffic solutions and all that. So that's just all part of the plan. Now for the night lights or the details, decorations. So lights, of course, that's the most important thing. We need to put lights on the pedestrian paths. As you can see, I'm doing it manually. These days, it's super simple with that, it was super simple even back in the day, because that align function in Move It is kind of old. I was just not using it. But yeah, it's really easy. And obviously, if you are doing it during the night, then you can immediately see the effect. So you are going to position the lights so that they're not really going to overlap, and you are going to build just enough of them to make it, nicely light up. I suppose one thing that I kind of learned is that if you're trying to do this kind of bright looking city, don't really overdo it with the street lights, because it's just not looking very good with City Skylines lighting. It's so much better to have those little shadows in between them, and it's just creating something more interesting anyway. So I guess that's the technique. In this New York building, I'm going to use those spotlights shining through the roof, because we are doing that in that Soho building from before. So that's just kind of complementing the area nicely. I'm not really going to do that many ads though in this particular place, because it just didn't really felt appropriate. But we did outline that residential building with those red beams, and that skyscraper, the dark one in the center, it is going to light up on its own as well during the night with some nice colors. Oh yeah, and then I placed that brutalist looking structure without any windows there, made it very dark, because I really do want to have these kinds of blocks a little bit darker compared to Aurelia, for example. And then I used also those white beams on the sides of the building. So overall, this place is not really all that crazy during the night, but I think it follows some established styles, really, of the general area. But don't worry, I think that in the next episode of Asturis, we are going to jump to the other side of downtown, to that actual super high density part of the downtown, and there we will play with lots more lights and ads and everything like that. So anyway, these are the finished cinematics. We could have seen the before and after, of course, and then this a slow pass over the area, where you could have really seen all those pedestrian connections throughout these blocks. And this place really is super interconnected. And with these kinds of close-up shots, you can really appreciate the amount of people that are using all these new pedestrian paths. And There's actually a larger, if I see right, there is a larger volume of people using those paths compared to the streets. So that's exactly what I was saying. These elevated paths are more convenient for the pedestrians. This is that La Défense building on the beach or in the marina, and all of these paths are going from it. I did not really detail the pedestrian paths too much, except this wide one here. I did divide it with the planters, with some kind of trees, but these narrower ones, like I said before, I made them around 6 meter wide because that is the width of the street invisible path that I'm using. So I don't want to clutter those areas because people are going to then bump into all of those things that I would put there, and it's just so much better to keep those places open if you have enough volume of people to fill those open spaces. That's just, much better. Like moving details like cars and people and trains and everything, like that's kind of why I build cities in City Skylines, right? So if I do have those, then I'm going to make sure that they will form those detail in the area. That's exactly the case, for example, in right here with that high-speed train. It doesn't really serve any purpose in the city because I'm not allowing tourists, because I hate the models, and they're just forming the decorations, but I still like looking at the trains, how they are running in there. So it's exactly the same with people. These are the night shots. There you can see that kind of like a W, red W on that residential building down below, and also that colorful skyscraper that nicely lights up. And I also did all those little industrial looking lights down in those block centers. Those are the yellow lights, kind of also highlighting the tram line, but not so much, only with like little dim yellow lights that I already established. You cannot really see it over here, or can you? Down on the beach on the left side, it's not really the beach, it's just the waterfront. I did those dim yellow lights there as well. But anyway, that is going to be it for this Asturis episode. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you liked it. If you did, then please do all those things below the video to help it on YouTube, and that's going to be all. Also, big thanks to all the channel members, the channel supporters, who decided to directly support the channel by becoming the channel members. Through the join button below or the link in the description. Thank you again, guys. That's really going to be all. Goodbye.